Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Europa Rediviva. Today, I'd like to talk about the future of Europe. What is Europe's strategy? So, we are witnessing the remilitarization of Europe, the re-establishment of Europe on new coordinates, whereas before it was a peace project, now it is becoming a militaristic society and a militaristic project. It is uniting countries under militarization instead of under prosperity as it used to do. And I'd like to discuss the issue of its strategy. What is its end goal? What does it want to achieve? We have all of these articles in European media saying how Russia will attack Europe until 2030 or until 2029 and so on. And this is why the militarization effort is picking up speed. But nobody seems to be asking any questions regarding how did we end up in this situation and what's our end goal? Why are we going on this path? What is it that we're trying to achieve? There is a whole history of Russian-European relations after the Second World War, and it was, despite the fact that it was under the auspices of the Cold War, it was a peaceful framework of collaboration. After 1975, after the Helsinki Accords, the OSCE was set up, and then Russia was also, after the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia was invited to be part of the Council of Europe. So we had all of these frameworks of mutual understanding, of cooperation, not to mention in the economic sphere. So the Nord Stream pipelines were an economic and also political vehicle of cooperation. If you look at the pictures from the inauguration ceremony of Nord Stream, there was Rutte together with Medvedev opening the valve. So it was done at governmental level, and it was also a means of political cooperation, let's say, with Russia. And then the United States orchestrated this whole thing in Ukraine with the Maidan 2014, and then the Europeans negotiated the Minsk Accords in bad faith. Both Angela Merkel and François Hollande admitted that they were just buying time to better arm Ukraine for the war that they did not want to prevent. And now Europe seems to be going the extra mile and preparing for direct war with Russia. And the question is why? Of course, the official answer that fact checkers give you, the European fact checkers, is that Russia is just pursuing this aggressive foreign policy, this imperialistic and militaristic foreign policy of invading westwards. So it has just set out to invade westwards unprovoked, and we have to fight it because we are westwards, so it will be coming to invade us for some undisclosed reason. How the same Russia, the same leaders evolved from cooperating in terms of energy, being the main energy supplier of Europe, to being this invading force, the same leaders, the same Putin, for example, and the same Medvedev, this is not discussed. Some propaganda pieces were circulating a few years ago saying that Putin has lost his mind and he's no longer cooperative, but it's the same guy, and it's the same policy establishment, and it's the same Russia that was cooperating peacefully with Europe and providing energy inputs at very low prices compared to the alternatives. This same Russia is now the invading force, preparing its invasion of Europe. Why it is not discussed, and it is prohibited to be discussed, because the answer would be an obvious one, and European fact checkers do not agree with this answer. They are instructed to sanction it as disinformation and propaganda. So therefore, a conflict with Russia is inevitable. But what I'd like to ask is, what is the end goal? So, okay, I can admit, um, if a good enough proposition is made that it is the rational thing to do and that we have to gain from it, then I can agree with it. But I'd like to see what's the proposition, what's the rational thing that Europe wants to obtain through this war. Because, for example, the last time this happened, so in 1941 with Operation Barbarossa, even though the rhetoric was we have to defeat the Bolshevik Hydra, the Hydra of communism, whatever, whatever, there was an actual pragmatic plan behind it. It was not just, the German, the Reich did not go to commit suicide in the East just for rhetoric and just for misplaced ideology and for slogans. It actually had a pragmatic plan. It wanted to conquer the European part of Russia because it saw it as its hinterland, and it had the Generalplan Ost, according to which it wanted to develop that area as part of the German Empire, to create new German cities and to have the Eastern Slavic population genocided and whatever was left to have as indentured laborers, so basically as slave labor, for the German agricultural corporations. This was the plan. They actually wanted something pragmatic out of it, so they wanted to have some sort of return on investment. They were investing in the army, and after having conquered the western part of continental Europe, they had a new project to conquer the eastern part of continental Europe as well, and then came the pragmatic part, in order to make this agricultural hinterland and so on. Of course, it did not work, and it was a stupid thing to want, but still, at least they had some sort of rational plan. Whereas now, what Europe is doing is even more stupid, because it doesn't, it has no rational end point to this war with Russia. I don't think there is somewhere a plan to actually conquer the continental part of Russia and divide up its riches among the Western European countries and to use its population for slave labor or something like this. I don't think there is an equivalent project right now to the Generalplan Ost. So therefore, this whole military buildup and this shift from civilian production to military production in the European economy has no end goal, has no theoretical return on investment. Okay, the Reich did not manage to obtain practically the return on investment that it envisaged, but at least it envisaged it. At least it had some sort of rational endpoint to its invasion of the Eurasian steppe. But Europe right now is just doing it under the cover of slogans, of moralistic slogans, just like the Reich did. So we must fight the scourge of Putin. We must destroy imperialist Russia and so on. But practically speaking, Europe doesn't really have a plan of what to do after it wins the war, because Europe doesn't really think it will win the war. It is just building this military machine up, allegedly in order to defend from a Russian attack. But at the same time, it is seeing Ukraine, which is a belligerent in this war, an active belligerent. It is seeing it as a part of Europe. It is seeing it as a future part of the EU. And it's the envisaged accession date for Ukraine is earlier than the envisaged invasion date for Russia. So they're saying Russia will attack until 2029, but Ukraine must be a member of the European Union until 2027. Okay, so what's really going on here is that the European Union is preparing for when it will be in direct war with Russia as a consequence of having integrated Ukraine. Now, I was born and brought up in Romania, which entered the European Union in 2007. And there was a precondition for not only for Romania, for all the countries that entered the European Union, not to have problems with their neighbors, not to have border conflicts. This is why Romania had to sign these border agreements with all of its neighbors. So For me, it is quite unfathomable that the European Union would decide to integrate Ukraine, to bring Ukraine into the Union, while Ukraine is an active belligerent in this war with Russia. And then to take it upon itself, then Europe to take it upon itself to defend Europe because it is defending the European Union. In my opinion, this is a suicidal plan, and I don't know why it is even being considered. But I don't think anybody is doing any considerations. I think it's just inertia and moralism that cannot be questioned, because if you question it, then you are evil. Of course, Europe is far from being on the moral side of history right now, because it is supporting Israel's genocide, and it is upholding any kind of imperialist foreign intervention that the United States does, be it kidnapping foreign heads of state, be it bombing sovereign countries. Whichever imperialist project the U.S. embarks upon, the Europeans closely follow along and uphold. So there's no question of Europe defending some sort of moral line or something. It is just supporting the geopolitical ambitions of the United States to remain hegemonic and to wage these wars against whoever challenges its hegemony. Some of them directly, some of them through proxy. And Europe is behaving as one of these proxies, just like the coalition of countries supporting Taiwan against China in the South China Sea is behaving as a US proxy. The European Union is also behaving as a US proxy towards Russia, because Europe had this collaboration with Russia. It was mutually beneficial. And now Europe is just sacrificing itself without having any sort of rational end goal of what it might achieve against Russia, under some false moralism, some hypocritical moralism, that it is fighting evil. If Europe were to fight evil, it would not be integrating so closely with Israel. Israel is a member of UEFA, the European Football Club Association, and of the Football Federation Association. Israel is member of the Eurovision Alliance, so they do this gay song competition every year, and Israel is part of it. And Europe is Israel's number one weapons supplier, even though the United States is Israel's number one financial supporter, because it has this yearly budgetary allocation of several $1 billion going straight to Israel. Europe is the number one weapons supplier for Israel. And there is no question that Europe is doing something moralistic, that Europe is doing something out of principle. No, Europe is just following in the footsteps of the United States regarding whichever objective. And if the United States were tomorrow to attack China over Taiwan, Europe would all of a sudden discover that there's the Chinese scourge upon the planet, and it must defend the human species from the yellow peril, and it must go and attack and, of course, defeat and conquer China, because this is the moral thing to do, even though China is Europe's biggest trading partner. And several European countries, such as France, actively request Chinese investment, not only in terms of capital, but also in terms of technology, because China is now superior in technological terms to Europe. But nevertheless, if the US tomorrow would decide to attack China, and of course it would come up with this bullshit that it is supporting Taiwan or it is supporting the Uyghurs and so on, we would be flooded by this wave of European propaganda saying how we should attack China as well, because we are trying to defend the Uyghur population or the Tibetans or the Taiwanese from the Chinese Han scourge, and that it is a moral imperative. We should not ask ourselves what are we getting out of it, we should just say that it is something that we have to do out of principle, out of duty. We have a Kantian duty to go and militarily invade China on the behest of the United States in order to fight for principles. The principle being the United States itself. So whichever foreign policy position the United States has, out of pragmatic reasons, we construct a whole moral argument of why that's the only path to take for us as well, even though it's not our imperative. And we demonize everybody who questions it. We say that they are anti-this and anti-that, and we start sanctioning them, censoring them, and so on. My previous episode was why Germany is the problem, the sick man of Europe, and why Germany is the problem country of the European Union. And it is precisely for having this way of thinking. Germany does not think about its own objectives because it has been conquered after the Second World War. It has been turned into an American occupation zone. Of course, there was also the Russian occupation zone, but it fell in 1990 and it reunified with the American occupation zone. And now this American occupation zone has all of these moral outrage episodes. Whichever country the US starts bombing, the Germans devise some sort of moral argument that the leader of that country is the new Hitler, that the leadership of that country, the political class, the political establishment of that country are the new Nazis, and that it is the moral duty of every German to fight Hitler and to fight Nazis. And today you fight them in Libya, tomorrow you fight them in Syria, the day after tomorrow in Iraq, now in Venezuela, now in Iran, and so on. And now, of course, in Russia, because the former partner of the European Union has become the new Hitler that needs to be defended not out of pragmatic reasons, but out of moral indignation, because the US indicated him to be. So Biden said that Putin is a mad dog that needs to be put down, and had all sorts of speeches saying that Russia is now the Third Reich and that humanity must do anything to defeat it. So basically to do to Russia what was done to the Third Reich, to just invade it and destroy it, turn it into a foreign occupation zone, destroy its statehood. And the Europeans are embarking specifically on that. They are embarking specifically upon this task. Of course, the Europeans might say that they are not willing to actually invade Russia. They're just building up their defenses. Okay, sure. But then they're building up their defenses because they say Russia is militarizing. But Russia is militarizing because they are pumping Ukraine full of weapons. So Russia is militarizing because Russia, first of all, is fighting an actual war, and second of all, it sees that the Europeans have hostile intentions because the Europeans are severing their ties to Russia, which used to be mutually beneficial, and the Europeans are using Ukraine as this proxy against Russia. So Germany, for example, is building these factories which build drones capable of striking Moscow. This is like official, they have a range of 1,500 kilometers and they are capable of striking Moscow. This is the German official policy right now. They are okay with basically striking Moscow through the Ukrainian proxy. So of course Russia sees these things. Russia also sees this human build-up, these huge military exercises along its border, and these plans to send troops to Ukraine under the guise of peacekeepers, or in order to defend Odessa, as is the case with the Odessa Triangle. And of course, it is preparing for this contingency that Europe might once again invade after the Napoleonic invasion, after the Barbarossa invasion, after the Crimean War. There were several of these wars that collective Europe, so to say, fought against Russia on Russian territory. And of course, the Russians are preparing for this, and they might even strike first, just because, as Putin once said, when you know a fight is inevitable, it's okay to strike first. So Russians might see this as a self-fulfilling prophecy, and they might attack Europe just because they believe that Europe is building this huge army to once again invade Russia, as it did in the previous centuries. So actually, militarizing Europe is putting Europe in a perilous position. If you are Mexico and you start building a huge army, of course the United States will think that you have hostile intentions towards it. Then why else would you build a huge army? And the United States would preemptively bomb Mexico, or if Mexico were to host Chinese and Russian military facilities on the border with the United States, of course the United States would reserve its right to bomb those facilities, just like it did not accept Soviet missiles in Cuba. Of course, Russia would not allow itself to be again invaded and to be conquered by this European army that is in the making, and that can have no other enemy. There can be no other reason for Europe's military build-up than to strike Russia. Especially given the fact that Europe is not building this army out of resources which it can spare, but it is actually converting the civilian economy into a military one. So the only end game to this would be that it would fight a war in the next 5 to 10 years, because otherwise a military economy cannot be sustained indefinitely without doing any conquering, so to say. So without putting that capital that is invested into weapons to some productive use. And the only productive use for weapons is to conquer resources. Hitler on the Eastern Front sent its armies to the Caucasus to conquer the oil fields in Baku. That was an important goal. You do not just build a huge military to have it sitting idle, because it is just an expense without any return. You use it to actively conquer resources, to funnel them again through the military industrial complex, and to have some sort of profitability on the whole endeavor. But if you just build up a huge army and you militarize yourself, and you announce every day in the media that there will be a war with Russia in 2 years, in 3 years, and so on, of course Russia is taking this as a declaration of intent, and it is taking this as an indication that Europe is preparing to attack Russia, because there is no other. Because if Russia had peaceful collaboration and a mutually a reciprocally advantageous collaboration in the past decades with Europe, and now Europe all of a sudden is fighting Russia through this Ukrainian proxy, and it is also preparing to fight Russia directly. Of course, Russia cannot stay idle and say that it is just to believe that Europe will just militarize itself for defensive purposes, because it has nobody to defend against, only Russia. Russia is the only country that it can defend against on the Eurasian landmass, and the fact that it is arming itself to suicidal levels, so it is allocating resources to its militarization and to help Ukraine to a level that it is cannibalizing the civilian economy. And now Germany makes no more civilian use goods, but rather military use goods. It is turning its automobile factories into tank factories and so on. Then what can Russia think? It saw the movie before. It saw it in 1941. So Russia cannot think that Europe has pacifist ends when it is committing economic suicide on the altar of arming itself against Russia. So therefore, Europe is developing out of inertia this path, which I cannot call a strategy because I do not see the rational endpoint that Europe might gain from, of open conflict with Russia, and I don't see what it might gain from it. So Europe cannot hope to conquer Russia. Russia is the biggest nuclear power, and it cannot afford to lose a conventional war that threatens its existence, because this is what its military doctrine obliges it to do, to strike with nuclear weapons, even if it were not attacked with a nuclear weapon. And so what is the rational end goal that Europe might achieve? I don't see any. If you know any pragmatic strategy that Europe is following, please let me know, because I might not be in the know of this. But all I see are slogans and fake virtue. Just like Germany has this rhetoric towards Israel. There was a politician the other day saying Germany must defend Israel at whatever cost, and in case Israel were threatened, Germans must go and defend Israel with their lives. This is what a German official said a few days ago, out of some principle. So the same type of logic, the same type of lack of logic, just hysterical virtue signaling and hypocritical moralization is employed with respect to other policy areas of the United States, other foreign policy objectives. Russia, China, of course Venezuela, Iran, any kind of enemy that the United States sees as a rival that threatens its worldwide hegemony, or that it wants to use as a pawn in its proxy fights, then Europe must just toe the line, and Europe must live up to the expectation of being such a good vassal of daddy, as Rutte calls the American president. So this is what I wanted to tell you. If you like what I do, like, share, subscribe. If you want to support me, you'll find a link in the channel description how to do so. And until next time, take care.